Lani Muelrath, and I'm here at the Big Mind, Big Heart event in San Francisco. And I am really excited to be able to have some conversation with Genpo Roshi, who has been leading this wonderful event. And I have lots of questions, of course, that I'd like to ask you, and I'll see if I can limit myself to a couple. One of them being, we've been through about 10 hours of doing a lot of work here as a group. And when it comes to wanting to explain to someone, I'm finding it hard to find the language to say, what is this process about? And yet, I certainly want to avail a lot of people to the simplicity of this process, the directness of it, and the very down-to-earth process that it is for people to be able to make change, become clear, and become happier human beings. So, can you speak to that?
Well, what this process is, it's a way to empower people to be who they are. And what I've done, I've been studying Zen for nearly 40 years, and I've studied Western psychotherapy for over 40 years. And about 10 years ago, I discovered a way to bridge these two, the Eastern philosophy, Eastern wisdom of Zen, and the Western wisdom of some of the best of psychotherapy. And what I do is I teach, let me use the idea of a triangle. I teach that if we have Zen on one side of this triangle and we have Western psychotherapy or voice dialogue on the other side, how we can actually access the best wisdom of Zen, which we would call the transcendent wisdom, wisdom that allows us to drop the self and be liberated, to be free, to be happy, to be contented, to be at peace, and to use the Western technique to get there. So the Western technique of voice dialogue, which is to speak from the aspects of ourself that are normally either disowned or maybe have never been awakened. And then to, let's say, hold these two, to include these two aspects and come from the point of the apex of the triangle where we're integrated whole. So where we have the wisdom of the East with the Western wisdom, and that what we do is we're able to empower ourselves to be completely free and liberated, and at the same time to embrace our emotions, our feelings, our desires, our ego, even our arrogance and self-centeredness, but to embrace it in a way that we do transcend it. We go beyond it. So I would call the apex more like a selfless self or an egoless ego, where we're not denying the ego, we're not making it wrong or bad, but we're allowing to mature and for it to grow up and act in a very mature and healthy way that it takes responsibility for this life, and at the same time is free to be happy and joyful and at peace.
Oh, that was lovely. That worked great. With that, I wonder if I could ask you a question a little bit about how I can best use this in some of my practice that I'm doing. I come from, I work as a holistic fitness coach and work with a lot of women in helping them move through their barriers to really realizing their fitness dream, whether it's weight loss or having more energy. And it became very apparent that it's not about the diet and the exercise, even though it is. It's about how you're able to just work through your hidden obstacles, some not so hidden. And one of the techniques, I come from an insight meditation background, which has been a really nice intro to this, the work that you're doing. And I actually, I don't profess to be a great master in that or anything, but I do teach some of those techniques to help, and it's been like probably the single biggest shift for women is to be able to work through that process. And I would certainly love to know how I might be able to work with some of the tools that you've given us for that, or is there a way that you can direct me that I might be able to implement or encourage that in my process?
Well, sure. One of the things that we find, obviously, is we all have our story, we all have our perspective, we all have certain ideas about ourselves, and those things limit us. And very often they come from decisions we've made in our childhood or adolescence as we've grown up, and we get stuck in those decisions. They're kind of how we see ourselves. And so we're constantly battling with that image of ourselves, or these decisions that we made, and very often they're around protecting ourselves from the world. So one of the ways, of course, we can protect ourselves is eat, you know, or put out more weight, or up more weight, you know, to protect yourself. Or it could be a lack of trust, or so many ways. So what we can do is actually speak to those decisions, or speak to those voices that are holding that story, and by actually giving them voice, what we can find is we distance ourselves from ourselves, and therefore it's easier to drop the self, just what we were doing all day today.
Oh, yeah.
So if I'm identified with my decision as who I am, or if I'm identified with my perception of who I am, or my view of who I am, it's very hard to let go of that view, because I'm so identified with that view, I'm very attached to that view. To let it go looks like death. But if I can create some distance from my view by being the view, and then I create the distance from the self, then I can switch and be the self and see the view as just a view, and I can be the view and see the self actually is free of view already. And then it's easier to drop. So you can give voice to some of these aspects, or we can say states of mind, that are holding on to these things that are limiting us and keeping us bound and unfree, and maybe overweight or unhealthy.
Well, it becomes so habituated,
Exactly.
and then we're just in that process. Well, I think I could play with that, and working with clients, and just in an invitation way, and seeking to find those different voices and to talk to those.
That's right.